Today, Owen Ryan, from Managing Director of Galty Group, is chairing, and James Ring, who's a specialist in leadership and leadership management in your companies, is going to be our guest speaker. When James has spoken, we'll have a period of question time and also a general discussion, if you wish, about the state of the industry as things are with COVID. So over to you, Owen. You take from there.
Thanks for the introduction. So, so look, today is a discussion with James and Alan there as well from Ingenium. They're a Limerick-based company who are training predominantly, but consultation as well. Let James give a bit more on that. I know James over the last few years. James used to be CEO of Limerick Chamber of Commerce. Very strong background in leadership. James ran a program as part of the Limerick Chamber, which brought all the top companies in Limerick together and the leaders of those companies for mentoring sessions, seminars with some very top speakers, including Joe Schmidt, Andy Kenny at the time when he was Taoiseach, Mary Harney, people like that, which was a great program. Subsequently, James, you joined Ingenium as their CEO. Ingenium are a very good company. We've used them over the years. They have some good training programs, really good leadership program, which I'm sure you're going to promote today, James. Actually, we sat beside each other on that the first Smart Choice program, I think. So look, I think, James, you're going to talk about decision making, which is one of the key areas in leadership today.
Yeah.
So I'll let you go from there and we'll see how we go.
Cheers. How are you doing, lads? Look, this isn't supposed to be a lecture from me, so I'd appreciate it, because there's a lot of it at the start in particular is interactive. So I'd appreciate if you'd, even if you don't want to turn on your cameras, you might shout the answers at me or put them into the chat function. Owen asked me to do a piece on, in particular, around decision making and how it affects our leadership. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring you through a short enough presentation, which I look at the things that can affect your decision making and make you make bad decisions. And in particular, in times of crisis, and I suppose for some, if not most, if not all, we've been through a crisis in the last year. We're still going through it. We might be a bit more comfortable with it, but I can tell you now that what the stress that would have brought would have resulted in a large impact on your decision making. Maybe you look back on some of those decisions and you think, maybe I could have made a better or more informed decision. So I'm just going to bring you through this PowerPoint slide fairly quickly. But the first thing is, I want you to think about, like, what I'm trying to get at today is that decision making is the cornerstone of leadership. And why I say that is because if you're in a leadership position, the reason you're paid more than the person underneath you is simply because you have to make higher consequence decisions. That's really the purpose of leadership, is to make high consequence decisions and take that responsibility and accountability for big decisions. And that stress and pressure it brings is the reason you get paid more. So here's the first question. I just want you to put this into your chat function. At the bottom of your screen there, you just type it or shout it. So I'm asking a question up the top there. Who's the best rugby team?
Connacht.
Well,
because that's where I live.
Yeah, so I'm seeing stuff coming in the chat. So Munster, Leinster. Anyone else want to just give me your opinion on that?
Ulster.
So it's good, right? So what's happening here is, what I'm showing you here is the first thing that affects your decision making. I've asked you a question, which is the best rugby team. Who's the best rugby team? But what I've done is I've primed your biases by putting 4 crests up there that are not the answer. So when you look, you see I've primed you by putting up 4 Irish crests, when the real answer is the Springboks. So who's the best rugby team? The answer is the Springboks. Now, someone did put up Ireland there, which is interesting. So they looked beyond the 4 provinces. But what I was trying to do, guys, was show you that you can be primed. Advertising is a brilliant way of doing this. They prime you to think about their product. So the first one, what the point of this was to show you that we all have biases, and biases affect our decision making. And some biases are obvious like that. I'm going to say Munster because I'm from Munster. I'm from Connacht, so I'll say Connacht. But when you step back and look at the question that you're being asked, it's a different question. The answer is different. And in our day-to-day lives, in business, we are constantly affected by bias. You work in a male-dominated industry. So is there a bias towards gender in your industry? We all have been in a world where we see the isms that exist. Sexism, racism, ageism. They exist. We're not allowed to say, do you know what, I'm a racist. And nor would you expect someone to say that. But when you look at yourself deep down, have you a bias? Would you hire a black person or a white person if you had a choice, or would it matter? So what I'm trying to get at today is these are the hard questions that you need to ask yourself, because that's what goes on in people's brains, this bias towards a gender, a race, or a rugby team. The second thing I want you to look at, so I'm going to pick up Owen there. Owen, come back on the line here for a second. Owen, answer that question there for me.
Can I get my calculator out, James? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Can anyone answer that off the top of their head? Nobody can do that unless you're a bit of a maths genius. You can't do it. The answer, of course, when we do get out the calculator, is 3,444. Okay. Now let's look at the next question. Won't do that for me.
28.
And there's the next part. Is the next part that affects us in our decision making is fast and slow thinking. So none of us had to, when 7x4 came up on the screen, we all automatically knew 28 because we had our tables beat into us as kids. But no one ever did the 7x41 times tables because we just didn't do it. So it takes time to think. Now again, look at your business. Every day, there are things that you do almost on a daily basis that you don't have to think about. You just do them. You're in autopilot. Driving a car is the best way of looking at it. When we were learning how to drive cars, you're conking out constantly. You're constantly thinking about every moving part. And as you get better, all of a sudden you're driving the car and you don't even realize you're driving the car anymore. You don't remember how many times you put on the indicator when you turn. You don't remember gear changes. They're automatic. And that's great because it means you master what you're up to. But when you master things and you get complacent, it means mistakes can be made. So be very aware of autopilot, cruise control, because it's when you do that and suddenly when you come into work every day and you expect things to be exactly the same as yesterday and the curve comes, that's where the mistake is. Because you're in autopilot, but the ground has changed underneath you. The road is icy now. You may never have dealt with the icy roads before. So that's the second part I want to look at, is the fast and slow thinking idea. The next piece I want to look at is present motivation. This is what is called, it's distraction. So I'm going to put up these interesting numbers for you. In 2000, the average attention span of a human was 12 seconds. Now, isn't that mental? 12 seconds was the average attention span of a human being. A goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. Would anyone like to guess what the human attention span is now in 2020? Just put it in the chat function. How many seconds do you think it's at now? So we're all saying really low numbers. The attention span is 8 seconds. So now humans have an attention span that's shorter than a goldfish, which again is hard to believe. But look at the distractions in the world that we live in. In a world where you're constantly being bombarded by this bloody thing, your phone is constantly on you. So it's constantly distracting you. Notifications, whatnot. People coming into your office in work all the time. All these curveballs means when we're that distracted, it's highly likely we're going to make mistakes. Now, the next thing I want to look at as part of that in terms of distractions is your quality of decision making decreases when your level of distraction increases. Now, so they're inversely proportional. So the first thing is 100% in the moment, 100% of the time. It's almost impossible. So nobody lives in that world because we're human, we're not computers. So we can never be 100% in the moment, 100% of the time. Now, these are not in order, so don't take these as the first thing is fatigue, etc. These are, what I'm going to show you is factors that impact on the level of focus you have. So tiredness is a big one, and we've all been there. And I'm sure in particular when COVID hit, you had to adapt so much that you were working longer hours, you were at home thinking about work, so you didn't really have time to switch off, and that results in huge levels of fatigue. We all know what fatigue does to the body, but also remember those drink driving ads, they say that fatigue is almost as bad as drink driving. So it really does distract you and helps you not stay focused. Multiple client demands. So again, many of you have been involved in industries where your clients shifting has been landed on your shoulders. So what I'm getting at is, if you're dealing with one person, you can fairly much concentrate on that. But the reality of our lives as business leaders is we're involved in everything. So you're being distracted all the time because everybody's coming in saying, can I have 2 minutes of your time? And those 2 minutes add up to full days. The next part is there's problems. So you might have an awkward client, or you may have made a mistake on a project. You may have got your numbers wrong, whatever is happening. And you're up to your neck in it now because the boss has to step in and try and solve this problem. So now you've got extra stress coming on you. And then life, family issues. Let's be honest, if one of us, I always think about Tony Holohan there, the CMO. Like Holohan's wife was dying behind the scenes, yet he's on the news every night trying to lead the country as best he can. That must have been incredibly distracting for that man. So imagine when your world, if you're in work and at home your child is very, very ill, where's your mind really? Your mind isn't with you in the office. The reality of life, because we're normal people, is your mind is at home where that child is sick, or your wife is sick, or your husband is sick. The reality of this is the average person is only present in the moment 51% of the time. So whilst I'm talking to you on this call for 20 minutes, whatever, 10 minutes of the time, I'm talking to the wall. You're not listening because you're checking your phone, you're checking your email, someone is coming into you, you're having your lunch. So only half the time you're with me. Now think about that in terms of a business decision. You're listening to a presentation or you're listening to a client, and with the best will in the world, you'll try and concentrate, but your mind wanders. And then after a few seconds, you think, Jesus, I missed what he just said, but I can't ask him because it'll sound like I'm not listening. It happens to us all. We read a page in a book, and at the end of the page, we've forgotten. We didn't even realize what we read, so we have to reread it because your mind is gone. So I want to get on finally to the decision making itself. So we gave you that stylus report. Now you didn't all do it. Only a few of you did it. I would recommend you do it. There's no gimmick, guys. There's no catch here. It's not that you're going to get a bill in the post or anything like that. It's useful to do it. But I'm going to bring you through what the report is like, what the report is saying, and then those of you who've done it can relate to it, and those of you who haven't, I hope you do it after this, and you can get a picture. But decision making sits in the middle of everything. Ultimately, as I said, in leadership positions, you're paid to make bigger decisions, high consequence decisions, and your behavior is critical in how you make decisions. So as you know, you lead by example. So if you're someone who cuts corners, doesn't look after your clients, is up for shoddy type workmanship, well then your staff will probably behave like that. However, if you hold yourself to high standards and you can hold your staff to high standards, the culture of the company will be like that. Governance is obviously underpinned by decision-making, because at the end of the day, leading companies is great and getting out there, meeting clients and doing deals is wonderful. But the mechanics of the business has to work behind the scenes. And that means you have to make good decisions on how you govern and manage your workloads. And then finally, at the end of the day, in a leadership position, you have to make decisions about the future direction of your company, your strategy going forward. And I can imagine for most of us, certainly in my world in Ingenium, our strategy, we threw it out the window in March and we had to write a new one because the world changed too muchness. So we had to pivot quickly. Now, some of you may have had to do something as drastic as that, and others less so. But I know that some of you, I know that we talked with Owen and Galty, and what they've completely shifted their business model in reaction to a new landscape. Not just COVID, but other factors as well. But it just shows you that you have to make those decisions, those big decisions. Do I pivot or don't I? So when I was sitting in my office in last March, when COVID was coming in around us, I could have made the decision to say, do you know what, lads, don't worry, we'll just ride it out. And if I did, Ingenium would have been closed down by now. But because we made the right decisions as a management team, we're still here. And I'm sure you're all in the same boat. The other one I wanted you, just a quick poll, I want you to, again, put into your chat function. How many thoughts do you think the average person has in a day? Just ballpark. And I'll give you a hint. It's in the thousands, right? So it's not 5. So just put into your chat function roughly where you think the amount of thoughts a person has in a day. Okay, 5,000, 10,000, 12,000. Yeah, okay, 1,500, 20,000. Okay, so the average thoughts, that's 40,000. Okay, so the average thoughts, guys, 35 to 50,000 thoughts. That might mean, you know what, I need to go to the toilet, or I get a glass of water, or I wonder who's winning the match. Could be anything. The next thing is, how many decisions do we think we make every day? Again, throw it into the chat function. Now this time it's just any decision at all. Okay, good. Okay, so we're saying most people are saying between 1,000 and someone is saying 10,000, a couple of people 10,000. Probably not enough, yeah. Okay, so the amount of decisions the average human makes a day, I'd love to know how the scientists worked this out, but they did anyway. But it's 2,000 to 3,000 is the amount of decisions that you make. But here's the critical question. How many high consequence decisions does the average person make? Now, high consequence is where if you make the wrong decision, something can really go wrong. Many of those you think the average person makes in a day. Okay, so now we're seeing the numbers drop dramatically from 100 down to 2. Okay, 100 is the answer. Now think about this for a second. Many of us are on the call, 20 of us maybe. That means there's 2,000 high consequence decisions going to be made today by us group of average men and women. That's kind of frightening. 2,000 decisions that could, if they go wrong, could have a huge impact on our business and on our lives. Now do you understand the importance of knowing how you make decisions, knowing how your biases impact on you, knowing how fast and slow and cruise control kind of thinking can impact on you, and knowing how being so distracted by life can be such a damaging thing to a business. So let's look at G. Just a few of you who've done it. I've tried to put up a kind of an amalgamated score. And what we see here is that the majority of you live in the analytical world. You're quite strong. You would expect that. People who work in the construction world in general would have to have good analytical scores because, of course, you're dealing with tight measurements, etc., and whatnot. You have to adhere to tight criteria, so you have to think through your projects before you do them. But also, what's interesting here is your conceptual scores are quite good. Now, you don't see that an awful lot in, and we work a lot with construction and engineering type companies. You don't see the conceptual scores being as high as that, which is really positive. Now, I admit that this is just a small sample size, but what it shows you is because you work in smaller industries, or smaller companies, sorry, the reality is you're probably in problem-solving mode a lot. Design solutions or problem-solving solutions. So you have to have good conceptual skills to think outside the box to fix problems. So in terms of what that stylus is, so when we make decisions, our brain every one of us has these 4 areas within our brain where we are all able to think analytically, conceptually, behaviorally, or directly. The first thing I wanted to show you is on this axis, the x-axis here, is the tolerance for the unknown. And what you have up the top in the analytical conceptual zone is these are people who are comfortable with ambiguity, with chaos. So when the shit hits the fan, it's okay because you can deal with the chaos. The people who are stronger down here in the behavioral and directive zones don't like chaos. So people who get strong scores down here like the world to just be the way they expect it to be. They just want to press the button and get the job done. They don't want to have to deal with chaos. On the y-axis, what you have is tasks versus people. So the people in the analytical directive zones are very good in terms of focusing on the task, the job that has to get done. The people who have good scores in conceptual and behavioral are good people managers. So they're able to engage with people. The trick is, as a leader, of course, you're managing people. So well, yes, you have to have strong analytical directive scores because that means you need to focus on getting the job done. But when you start managing people, you have to build out your conceptual and behavioral side because at the end of the day, your job is to manage people to get the job done for you. So if you don't have a decent score in all 4 quadrants, if you're weak, for example, in behavioral, which is where the majority of people are weak, because we've done this survey with nearly 60,000 people now around the world. And you see that behavioral is always the weakest score because most of us start off as, like I was a scientist. So when I was a scientist in a lab, I'm taught to think analytically because that's the world I live in. But when I became a people manager, I have to start stopping being so analytical and start trying to build out my behavioral side. And many of you on this call are probably people who are technically very strong. Maybe you came through an apprentice type background and have a trade in that format. Maybe some of you are engineers or quantity surveyors. Some of you might be accountants, I don't know. But the point is you probably grew up in a world where you were trained to be technically very strong. And that means your analytical skills had to be strong. But as you move into people management, you have to try and develop the other side. Very quickly on these 4 quadrants, the blue area, so those of you who get strong scores in the directive zone, you're very much about execution focus, get the job done, no ambiguity. Think about a fireman. Fireman turns up to your house is burning down. You don't want a fireman being analytical, standing outside the house whilst it burns with his hose in his hand thinking, will I spray the water, the roof or the ground? You just want someone who just grabs hold of it and sorts it. The problem with a directive person is, yes, you get the job done. You can piss people off very easily because you don't want to hear anyone else's opinion and you know best. And that might be right. You might know best. But the reality is if you're dealing with professionals, you'll demotivate them very quickly if you just are constantly telling them the way the world should be and not asking their opinion. The behavioral people are very, very good with people. So they know when, you know with yourself, guys, when you walk into a room and there's tension in the room because there's a battle going on. It's that awkwardness. If you're fighting with the wife or you walk in and or whatever, and there's someone fighting in a room, you know it because you can feel the tension. The behavioral people are very good like that. So they can understand the pulse of the room. They're also great in terms of if you're trying to do change process, something you want to change the routine or whatever, they'll help you get the pulse and say, do you know what? John isn't feeling this. You might want to pull him aside, have a word with him. And they're great to have, but the problem with them is that they don't like the bandwagon to move unless everyone's on the bandwagon. But as you know, in real life, the bandwagon has to go and sometimes you lose people along the way. The next zone is the analytical zone. And again, these are people who are good with data. They like numbers. They like to make informed decisions. And that's fantastic because it minimizes the risk of making poor decisions. The problem you have, though, is that can result in you missing the boat because you get analysis paralysis. So you take so long to make the bloody decision, the bus has left the station before you decide to get on the bus. And then finally, the conceptual. And that's great in terms of getting new ideas and problem solving. So these people think, you normally see this style associated with more artistic people. So maybe some of you are musicians or whatnot on the call, and ye have conceptual scores. That's where you'd see it. It's that artistic mindset that can think outside the box. Again, really strong skill to have. The problem with it is that what can end up happening is that you design a Swiss Army knife with so many gadgets on it that it no longer fits in your pocket. So they're constantly looking for the new idea instead of just making the decision. Now, I won't spend time on this because I don't want to, I think I've covered it enough. The last thing I want to show you is this idea of the 6 steps of decision making. I think this is a good process for you to follow. So if you took away one thing, take away this. So as I said, every one of us has those 4 quadrants. So it's not like you have the ability, it's not like you don't, if you're highly analytical, you don't have any behavioral scores, you do. What I'm asking you to do is, if you have a very strong score, for example, in analytical, go around the zones in your own head. So think to yourself, have I looked at all the options? Go into the green zone. Go into the purple zone. Have I spoken to the lads? Have I gotten their take on it? Are they up for this or are they not up for it? And then don't forget to hit the button, make your decision, be directive. At the end of the day, we have to make the call. So what I'm asking you to do is just when you're making a decision, run around the zones and think to yourself, have I used all the zones in making this decision? So just the 6 steps is what I'm going to leave you with. And this is a good process to follow. And I know it might sound a bit ridiculous to have this model for making decisions. It might sound like a typical consultancy kind of thing, but it really is a useful tool. The first thing is, when you've got a problem and a decision to make, you analyze the situation. So you'll get your data as much as you can to make an informed decision. So what you're looking at is, what are the key elements you need to look at? The second step is set the objectives. Okay, guys, what do we need to happen at the end of this? So the project is failing. What is the end goal? Do we walk away from the project or do we fix the project and X, Y, and Z are the outcomes? So that's where you get and you go into the zones of directive and behavioral. The next thing is you search for options. So what are our options here? We know we're in the shit. We know we have an outcome we want to achieve. How do we get there? So that's where the conceptual minds come in, and every option is thrown to the table and you trash it around until you can come up with an idea. And then you evaluate the options. So again, go back into your analytical mode. Keep conceptual, keep the ideas coming, but talk to people. Get their impression or their inputs and their thoughts and ideas. And when you've done that, you make your decision. You press the blue button and you make your call. But the key step at the end then is evaluate it. So once it's all done, can you evaluate this decision? Would you sit back with your team and say, okay, how did this happen? How do we solve it? And would we do the same thing again if we were given the choice? What you find is, it's a good way to sit down with your team, or even if it's just yourself. If you don't have a big team, it's just a nice 6-step process to follow. And I'll give you these slides, guys, so you don't have to worry about taking notes on them or anything like that. So that basically brings me to the end of my presentation. I was asked to do 20 minutes. I think I went a small bit over. So Owen, I'll hand it back to you, and happy to take any questions.
Brilliant, as usual. So look, I'll start off with a quick question or maybe a quick point. So these guys do it's called a Smart Choice program, which is basically a leadership program. Myself and James and maybe 40 or 50 other people around companies in Limerick did the initial course, very much focused on leadership, and it's excellent. But just going back to the present motivation, I mean, when we did that section, maybe there was 30 to 50 minutes on it. But one of the things I took from it was really it's about sorting your mind. I think it was a deck of cards was used as the analogy at the time. You have a deck of cards that might be a list of jobs to do. Spend your time organizing those in terms of priorities. Your priorities might be outside of work. Go sort them out. Because if you don't, I think the point you were making, you're just going to be totally distracted and only getting 25% of it right. So the thing I do, and I did it every day, where I'd come in and make a list at the start of the day. What am I doing today? But I never organized it. So I always picked off the easy items first, made it look like I made a great day's work, but actually never sorted the things that needed to be sorted. So now I come in, I remake my list every morning or every second morning, and I'd organize it by the importance. So start at the top and work your way down. So that's just one of the things I took from that program, which, it's only a simple thing, but it was that focus and that present motivation, I think, which James discussed there. So the other thing actually, and I've done the stylus report that you have there, I've done that probably 4 or 5 times with the lads at this stage. The first time I did it, I was way out there in terms of conceptual, and since I've been working with you over the years, it has come more and more back into the middle. It's still out there as being my bias, if you like, but once you get aware of the items and where, be it decision making or be it, I think you become a much more rounded leader. So where you're weak, you start to analyze that and become much more aware of it. So no, look, James, thank you. That was very good. So any other questions? Okay. So
James, Michael here. Great presentation, very simple, easy to understand. I think that was important. And I'm interested in what Owen said there about awareness. And something that strikes me about this, and characters are different, and I think your little questionnaire shows that. But discipline, you can learn techniques. So any tips for helping people to help themselves in terms of digesting the techniques that can move you along whatever curve it is to improve your decision making?
I do. I know Owen has given me a bit of a plug there for Smart Choice. I really didn't want to do a sales pitch on this at all, and we do cover this in detail. But Michael, there's a few exercises you can do, and I find, because as I said, we predominantly deal with construction, engineering world lads, and you'll find that when it comes to trying to get the distractions out of your head and mindfulness in its broadest terms, often the lads in the room throw their eyes up to heaven at me. But there's a useful exercise, and it's a very simple thing, and it just takes 3 minutes. And I start using it now. And again, I was probably one of those people who would throw my eyes up to heaven at the thought of mindfulness and all that kind of stuff. But what it is you just close your eyes and you just try and clear your head. And what comes in is you start getting, okay, this is my priority. So this thing keeps coming into your head. So whatever it is your top priority. You start filling it out under 4 categories. What do you have to do right now? So what's urgent and important, effectively? What do I have to do, but it can wait? So it's important, but not urgent. What is not important and not urgent, i.e. it's just trash in your mind, you need to get rid of it, nothing you can do about it. And what is urgent, but not important, i.e. what can I delegate to somebody else? And actually, when you do those 4 lists, a lot of the shite that gets caught up in our heads that distracts us, worrying about things that you can't influence and impact, you can just dismiss it. And it just helps you focus on what is the absolute priority for you this morning or this afternoon. And it's a brilliant, simple technique to do. Really is, but the key with it is doing it every day. It's great doing it on a Monday and then forgetting about it and you're back to chaos by the end of the week. But taking the time, and it's 3 minutes. So we're not talking, you go to the toilet you could do this while you're sitting on the bog, it's a simple thing. But it's amazing how much. So it's getting into the routine of doing that all the time.
Very good.
Yeah.
Hello, James. James, I have a question for you. My name's Joe McCrish from Farrell's. I just wonder, and it's around moving it up from the individual up to the team. What's the case for the team being greater than the sum of the individuals? So if you put what I'm trying to see the power of the team. I'm just trying to make the business case for that. My view is that if you've got four people on the team with common blind spots, when you put the collective unit together, it's going to have a different form than some of the 4 people. Do you understand the question? Or
I do. I know exactly what you mean. And I'll answer. It's a really good question, because that is where this really comes to the fore, is when you can analyze your team using stylus, because you can see where the strengths and weaknesses of the consolidated team are. I'll give you an example. So on the call here with me is my colleague Alan, and Alan is the head of our human performance side of the business. So he runs our safety programs and whatnot. Alan's mindset is completely different to my mindset. So I see Alan laughing up in the corner, but Alan looks at the world very differently to me. And as a result, what I would say is I would have strong leadership skills and Alan has stronger management skills. So Alan is stronger on the yellow and blue zones. I'm probably better in the purple and green zones. So when I need to focus on a project being delivered, I bring Alan into the conversation to help me think through how I would plan the project being delivered. In likewise, when Alan has maybe staff issues that he's dealing with, Alan will come to me because he knows that my strengths are somewhere else, and he'll speak to me about how am I going to broach this with somebody. So what ends up happening then is the collective becomes much stronger than any of the individuals on their own. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. That's my thought. But I'm also interested, if you get too many people from similar sectors, you know, there can be a bias in the team then as well on that. So it's about recognition that the team blind spot then as well.
Yeah, very much so. And again, that's now biases. I cover biases there in that one rugby slide, right? It's too much of a high level thing. Biases is a very intricate subject, and we go into a lot of detail in it. You're absolutely spot on. A lot of what you're talking about is called confirmation bias. And that means, Joe, that you hire people who think the same as you and will just nod and agree with you, really. Yeah. Or you end up being like that because you're all the same. So it's kind of, you're asking if your boss says to you, I'm right there, aren't I? He's really asking you, I'm right, agree with me. He's not actually asking you to say, no, you're not right.
Yeah, it's not a question.
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly what you're talking about is this, what we call confirmation bias.
Okay, and then we call it yes man, but that's
I give you the politer version of it, yeah. Yes man thing. And you know what's interesting is we all do it. We all hire lads who we think we get on with, you know, but you end up being the same as them. The real fun happens when you hire someone who's completely different to you and who probably wrecks your head because they're different to you and questions you all the time. But it's that questioning that ultimately makes you a better team.
And just in terms of the practical, would you see this, let's call it that psychometric sort of as a fundamental requirement before any key recruitment?
Now, what I'll point out this is Stylus isn't a personality test now. That's the first thing, right? I'll say to you. So it's not like the Myers-Briggs. So this is based on your decision-making style, which can change over the course of your life. Myers-Briggs doesn't change. If you're introverted, you stay introverted for the rest of your life. You don't become an extrovert as you get older. What I would say is it's a very useful tool to help you look at the mindset, firstly, of the people that you're hiring. Because if you have someone who's going to be a people manager and they do Stylus and you see that they have exceptionally low behavioral skills, then you have two decisions to make. One is you don't hire them because they can't manage people. Or two, you do hire them, but put intensive coaching around them to help them become a better people manager. So it gives you a better picture as to the decision-making style you need for the role you're looking to recruit into. Also, it also helps you look at the mirror of your team. So you're looking at your team now and you can see, Jesus, we're all analytical. I really need to get some conceptual people into this team. So it helps you then when you're analyzing your recruitment, you can look at them and see, have these people got, and have they got conceptual skills that your team is deficient on?
Brilliant. Thank you. Great. Thanks, James.
Okay.
I suppose just to add to that, we used Ingenium 3 or 4 years ago, I think, to do kind of a strategic report and a plan for the future, which arguably we could have torn up about 18 months later. But anyway, look, that wasn't the lad's fault.
You're not getting your money back.
Yeah, sure. But we took, I think, about 20 people and we went off-site for 2 days. And we did all the work that James is talking about. We reviewed all of our people, what type of people, where are our biases. We set out projects in terms of getting us to the goals that we wanted to achieve. And we built teams around it. So we had well-rounded teams focused on that goal. It was a really, really good process. Now, unfortunately for us, our business changed. But the skills I think we learned through that process have lasted within the business afterwards. And, it does improve dramatically in how we go about doing stuff. So I think it's the mindset it gets you into in terms of planning to get to the end goal was the important thing that we learned out of it. And the other thing I'd say that is, trying not to plug you here, James, but yeah, ultimately, if you sit back and you think about it, now we're all different size organizations, but if you have any bit of a team at all, ultimately as one person, leadership is very important, and we consider it very important here because we actually have such a small impact in terms of what goes on here every day, just as one or two individuals leading the business. But actually, our most job is being leaders and keep people motivated within our organization to actually go and do the 99% of the work that gets done here in a day. I could leave here today and it wouldn't make any difference. Or that's at least what we want to achieve, is that if I'm not here, the business is still running as well as it was before.
Yeah.
But we invested with the guys to get that mindset around our business, that, you know, this is very much a team effort, and having the right foundations for the right mindset to achieve that. Any other questions for James?
Just to share a bit there, that last point, Owen, I think is important. I think, you know, distraction was mentioned by James, and decision making by way of a team focus and the people who work around you. You know, it's important to establish your brand and identity and what your business values. And if you can communicate that well then to your team, that can help them make decisions. You know, if they understand your mindset and if you can communicate the values of the business, but then when they have to come and make a decision, they can rely on that or refer to it, you know, by way, and that just helps that whole process and reduces distraction for leadership. And I just found that something interesting to think about.
Yeah, and I think from our point of view, they know now why they're making decisions. You know, before, people who were relatively blind to what's going on in the whole organization, they might need to make decisions, but they don't, because they don't know why they're making them. So I think that's something we're heavily focused on at the minute.
Absolutely. Very good.
All right. Anyone else? Bill, do you want to come back in there?
But I think people have been very shy. Certainly, the presentation raised so many questions, which are totally relevant to all of us. I think that the issue of leadership in companies, and the issue of having everybody in the company, the tea boy, the cleaning lady, right up to the MD, all singing to the same tune. That is absolutely vital. If you have one dissenting voice within your team, while I don't want to say you shouldn't have dissension, of course, but it should be discussed, but they must all have the same goal. And if they don't have that same goal, you've got a problem. You've got to have them all trying to achieve the best possible result for your company. I think that's absolutely vital.
And I'd come in on that, like, you're spot on, Bill. Like, we would spend a lot of time, and it's going back to what Owen was saying, but even internally within Ingenium, not to mind with our clients, and Alan will tell you this as well, we spend a lot of time firstly creating personal development plans that link to the overall strategy of the company, because you're trying to show how everybody's actions impact on the strategy. But also, what we also tied in was people's actions in terms of the values of the company. Because at the end of the day, the values of the company are what you, as if you were my client, you'd see, are we, for example, we hold excellence up as a value, yet if we cut corners and try and cut costs, and provide you with a shoddy service, that's undermining the values of the company. In fact, and I don't know was I saying this to you all, but 2 weeks ago, I gave a written warning to one of my managers because he broke one of the values of the company. I believed he broke integrity. It's how serious I would take it. So I think when you're creating those plans, you have to show not just how their day-to-day actions link to the overall plan, but how their behavior in terms of the values of the company, how that links to the overall plan. Because in my world, we're building a business on being trusted. Because if you think about it, when you hire us as consultants like Owen would have done, you're trusting me and my team with very sensitive, private information. Yet if we have this reputation of being not having integrity, not providing an excellent service, what does that say about us? So I just think from a strategy point of view, you have to tie actions and behaviors into your overall plan, as well as linking it to the strategy.
Joe, I think you want to come in there.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. And thanks, James. An excellent presentation. I agree with Michael. You've kind of, I suppose, simplified, a fairly complicated topic, I suppose, in a way that people can understand it. So appreciate that. I just wanted to ask you, James, in terms of the overall topic, a lot of the businesses within within our industry are, in one way or another, kind of family related or family owned businesses. Does that bring a different dynamic into the kind of model that you've presented in terms of leadership and decision making?
It does, yeah. It does. Well, what you have, that's more of a culture issue, I think, Joe, than a decision making issue, right? So we have, like, Ingenium is owned by the majority shareholder, so we have an owner, if you like, who also is involved in the day-to-day of the business. So what you end up having is almost like a dual culture in many ways. So you have a culture amongst the team, and then you have a culture between myself and the owner, Hugh, right? But when you have an owner operated, and a family business is very like this, what ends up happening is that sometimes the owner can decide and overrule everything because he or she feels it needs to go in a different direction. And that can impact on the decision making in the organization. So what's critical is that role between the owner or the family, we'll say, whoever is that kind of over here. In the case of, we'll just say, like in terms of Galty there, Owen owns the business, but he's also he's the head of the business, but he's family owned the business. So he is effectively the decision maker, right? In my world, I'm the CEO, but there's a majority shareholder who technically can overrule my decisions. Because he could just say, sorry, that's not what we're doing. So it's that relationship. If that's the world you're in, Joe, that's a difficult one to manage. And the only way you can manage that one is by having a very, very honest, high trust relationship between the family or the owner and the person who runs the business. Because what happens if that breaks down is that you end up with a very frustrated CEO, decision maker in the middle, and a lot of discord amongst the team because they'll see that, I thought we made that decision, and then you're going back saying, yeah, but we've been overruled by the family. So it's a tricky one to manage, but it definitely does impact on the business decision making.
Yeah, I'm glad you acknowledge it's a tricky one anyways. But so I'm not talking about a specific case. I'm just looking at industry in general, and of course it's not related to specifically to our, I mean, it's a lot of businesses in Ireland. Is there any kind of tips then for, because it's a difficult one for the family, and it's difficult for the owner, and it's difficult for the CEO, as you say. Is there any kind of tips that will particularly help the owner to kind of, to, I suppose, to let go a little bit, or to, have you any tips, or have you any kind of magic wand that you have waved over the industry in your experience?
No, is the answer to that. I'll tell you, look, what I would say is this: you get inside the owner's head. So, for example, I know what the decision-making style of my owner is. So I know when I come to him, I have to be armed. So he's analytical. So I have to have data to back up my decisions, because if I don't, he'll reject them. So that helps me then be prepared. So when you go into him armed with your facts and figures, it turns into a different conversation then. Because what he sees then is, I've really thought this through, and then that ticks his box. So that works if you're analytical. But if you're not, if my owner wasn't very analytical and was much more, conceptual, I have to come up with a different way of dealing with him. So I think that's what you need to ultimately get into the head of. Get into the head of what is it that the owner wants, what way do they think, and make their decisions. And then you have to try and adapt your decision-making process to align with theirs so that you're on the same page. It's not easy.
No, I think that's actually very good advice, to be honest. Yeah, so really I think what you're saying there is understand the person that you're ultimately reporting into as best as you can, and try and influence the decision that way.
Yeah, you have to see the world through their eyes. We all see the world through our own eyes, and we're biased because of that. So you have to try and get in the heads of what's going on in his or her head, and that helps you make that's the way to do it. So it's a bit of psychology, really.
And thanks, James.
one of the reasons we took Ingenium on, we were looking at our business was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and ultimately the way it was set up, like that family organization, every decision went through, say, 2 of us or 3 of us, and everybody else was just doing the job, and we were trying to change that. So that we employed Ingenium to try and get the level of engagement of our staff at a much higher level and spread the responsibility across the business. But in doing that as a family member, you have to give away the I'm going to make a decision and I'll make it on my own when I go home some night. You know, you have to empower your staff to make a certain amount of decisions. If you don't, you burst the bubble and it's gone. And you only have to do it once. If you let a team go make a decision and you don't back it, now you can't back everyone, but if you don't back it, you burst the bubble and they're gone. And they're back just coming in to collect their money every week. And you're back making every decision about where your maintenance and your what's production like tomorrow. So that was something that we've worked really hard on over the last 3 or 4 years, was to try and get the level of engagement up. Sorry, Paul, I see you in there.
Yeah, thanks, James. Very, very enjoyable presentation. And for me, as second generation, our business is 60 years old this year, and my father, we eventually became major shareholders, me and my brother, only in the last month or so. But Daddy was old school, and actually, I'm not. I'm stating a fact now, right? Whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter. I don't mean it doesn't matter, but it is a fact. My father surrounded himself with yes men, right? But it actually worked for 40 years anyway, you know. And the business is evolving, but now you have 2 personalities running the business, and I actually would say it's basically top and bottom of your circle, right? And like what I'm trying to ask is, how do you manage with a directive approach vis-a conceptual and analytical? You know, like we would definitely be split in the middle, and I'd be interested to know any comments you might have.
Yeah, we had a similar problem actually with another client who was a legal firm, and there were partners there was 4 partners, and 2 of them in particular were having problems. It was because one was very directive and the other one was actually very conceptual, just happened to be opposites. And what was happening then was the conceptual person was taking too much time and thinking outside the box kind of thing, and the other fellow just wanted to make a call and he was getting frustrated, and we were brought in to try and relax the situation a bit. And what you had to make them see, the strengths of the other side. So the directive guy had to see what the conceptual guy was up to, and also the conceptual guy had to understand the frustrations of the directive guy. So that's one thing I'd say there on that. So you have to try and take the time to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the style. So that's where your stylist is very useful. That you could say to your brother, for example, look, this is what you are, this is what I are, and do you understand why they're working together? We are a better team. Like Alan, myself, believe me, I get frustrated with Alan gets frustrated with me, but we appreciate that we're doing it from the right reasons, and we're ultimately will help each other. So that's the first side of it, and we trust each other on that. And the other thing I'll say is, in terms of your father, as you said, ran the company with yes men, and a lot of old school construction world companies were run like that. I know we have another client here in Limerick, and that chap who ran it for so long and ran it really successfully for so long has now, you know, unfortunately he's passed away. He died an old man and he's passed away, and his family own it now. And they were trying to run under the same kind of guise, but number one, they didn't have the credibility that the old man had because he was highly respected in the field. But the other thing that you need to keep in the back of your head is times are changing and the generations are very different. So the generations so people who were born, we'll say from the 50s to the 80s, grew up in a generation where you were probably more, you grew up in a world where leadership was much more authoritarian. So i.e. if the boss told you do it, you did it, end of discussion. You grew up in a world where a job for life was all that mattered, because the people in that world grew up in a poor Ireland. The reality now is you're managing people who are millennials, and also the next generation, Generation Z they're called. They grew up in a very different Ireland, and they will not take the shit, if you like, that people before them took, i.e., they don't care about a job for life. So just because you have them, that doesn't mean you're going to keep them. The second thing with them is what they're more interested in is the development of their careers and their persons. So they want to see, how will you help me? So it's almost like the opposite of JFK. Ask not what you can do, ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. They're the opposite. So they want to know what you can do for them. And thirdly, they will not respond well to authoritarian leadership. So they only respond really to feeling that their voice is heard, which is extremely frustrating for managers and leaders, because sometimes you have to let them talk nonsense and it's nonsense, but you have to give them their chance to vent. So the style of management that your dad would have employed in the last number of years very successfully may no longer serve the company as it progresses forward, because it's a different animal you're going to be dealing with as an employee.
Well, do you know, you're 100% correct. My own son is in the place, and we have grandchildren coming down the line. So I'm thinking about the third and fourth generation. But I actually had a bit of a tiff with my lad now, and he's 35, 38 years of age. And I says to him, I'm going down to tell my father I'm sorry, because I was doing his head in exactly like what my son was doing my head in. So it's all good. Thanks again, James. Thank you.
No problem, Paul.
That was absolutely marvelous, super insight, James. Thank you very, very much. I would just like to make an appeal to all of you that are attending. IWFM needs to grow. It needs to grow because it needs to be able to bring people like James to you more often, and to be able to employ people like James to speak to you collectively. If each one of you listening today would go out and encourage one more member to join us, that would be absolutely marvelous. We need to grow to provide services. During the COVID period, it has been very difficult, but we have a tremendous program lined up. It'll all appear on our new website, which should be up in about 4 to 5 weeks' time. And in that website, we'll also have the facility to accommodate all our members and their websites, so that if somebody comes on to IWFM looking for something, they'll be able to find it through our network. So please go out and get one other company to join the network. Thank you. And thank you very much, James. And thank you, Owen. That was really super.
No problem, my pleasure. And just, lads, Owen will have my contact details. If anyone wants us to touch out, ask me any questions after it, feel free to give me a shout. I see an email or a question coming from Dana. Dana, if you want to send me an email, I'll answer that question for you offline.
That's super, thank you.
Just one last item there, James, the Smart Choice program, which we've discussed there a bit, which you're doing remotely at the moment. It is normally a classroom environment or whatever, but they're doing the program, which is meant for leaders of business, and I can't recommend it enough. You're giving us a 10% discount to IWFM members at the moment. Price is normally $19.50. I know the format's changed, James. What is the format at the moment?
Yeah, so it's a series, lads. It's a leadership program based around 3 blocks of managing myself, my team, my organization. It runs over 7 months, and it's 2 hours. It's a 2-hour webinar every 2 weeks. It's very interactive, so it's not just sitting there listening to me harp on for 2 hours. So it's a series of breakout sessions and work groups. So I think you'll enjoy it. So look, it's $19.50, but as I said, I've said to Owen, I'll give a 10% discount to anyone who wants to go on that program. I'll send you the new prospectus, the brochure of it, and you can circulate that with my slides if anyone wants to do it.
Okay, James, brilliant. Thank you.
Take care of yourselves.
Right, guys, we'll wrap it up there.
Yeah.
Happy.